You're tuned to Night Nerves, where if it's scary, creepy, thrilling, or disturbing, we read it, watch it, and talk about it. I'm Sam, and I finished reading all the books on my winter horror TBR. I actually finished them a few weeks ago, but I'm just sitting down to record a video and review and rank all of these books. I attempted to read 7 titles this winter season, and it felt like a lot. I felt slightly overwhelmed reading all of these books. I'm making a vow right now for future seasonal TBR videos to not exceed 5 story titles. I want to feel like I have the freedom and flexibility to read other novels that are not seasonal, to prepare for upcoming videos, to prepare for collaborations. So yes, expect that in the future. If you're new here, we are going to start with the book I enjoyed the least and work our way up to the one I enjoyed the most. So without further ado, let's talk about what I read this winter. In 7th place for me, we have Icebound, written by Dean Koontz. Icebound follows a group of scientists who are up in the Arctic collecting ice when they are hit by a tidal wave that breaks off an ice shelf with all of them on it, as well as some explosives that are set to detonate very, very soon. I was led to believe that this was a horror story with some action adventure elements to it, and it certainly started off like a horror story. The first few chapters focus on this terror of them being hit by the tidal wave, tussled around the ice shelf, moving away, them looking over the edge and into these dark, cold waters. It's seeming like there's miles between the top of the ice shelf and the bottom of the freezing waters. And there were these great, unnerving and terrifying scenes that Koontz wrote about in those first chapters. However, somewhere around the halfway point, I think a little bit before that, it really shifts gears and it becomes a lot more of an adventure story. And that is really where my interest started to dwindle. I had a really hard time staying focused on the story, staying invested, getting excited to read it. There's a lot of characters to follow, and there's a lot of different backstories that are explored in the novel, and I just found myself wanting to read the other books that were on my winter TBR. So around that halfway point, I actually decided to DNF this book. I believe this is the very first book that I have DNF'd on Night Nerves. A historical moment here. It wasn't a bad book. It's Dean Koontz. The writing is great. This is just a lot more of an action story, and I really, really wanted more of those horror elements, more of that man versus nature, and I wasn't getting it. I really didn't want to slog through the rest of the novel. Because this is a DNF for me, I am not going to give it a star rating. In 6th place, we have A Winter Haunting, written by Dan Simmons. A Winter Haunting is the 4th and final book in the Seasons of Horror series written by Dan Simmons, which starts with Summer of Night, Children of Night, Fires of Eden, and finally A Winter Haunting. And it follows Dale, who I've only read Summer of Night, but he's a child in Summer of Night, and he's an adult here. He's going through something of a midlife crisis, and he decides to return to his hometown of Elm Haven, where he plans to write a novel and kind of catch his bearings on life. But there are some spooky secrets dying to be uncovered in his old hometown. First things first, if you have not read Summer of Night, I would not recommend reading A Winter Haunting because there are spoilers for Summer of Night in it. I have not read Children of the Night or Fires of Eden, so I don't know if there are spoilers for those 2 novels or other references to that in A Winter Haunting that went over my head. Summer of Night is one of my favorite horror novels that I've read so far, and unfortunately, A Winter Haunting was nowhere near as entertaining and memorable as Summer of Night was for me. I started reading A Winter Haunting after I DNF'd Icebound, and I was actually very tempted to DNF A Winter Haunting as well, but I stuck it out because I was worried that that would snowball and I would end up DNFing a ton of these books on my winter TBR. I found that largely the story felt aimless and a bit bloated up until the 3rd act when things got a lot more interesting for me. I always say when I'm doing these seasonal reading TBRs that I'm going to take notes on my phone so I remember stuff, and somewhere around the 2nd or 3rd book, I stop taking notes. I think, oh, I'm gonna remember these things, and I don't. I always have to revisit the books, read little bits, read online just to refresh myself. But I did take one note for A Winter Haunting, and this note says, it takes its time to get going, and that was very true for me. In addition to the first half of this book feeling incredibly slow for me, I also felt pretty apathetic towards our main character Dale here, which is strange because I really remember enjoying him in Summer of Night. The writing is good, it's Dan Simmons, but this story was not for me. I'd initially rated this at 2.5 stars, but this was a bit of a slog for me. It was not a very enjoyable read up until the ending of it. One of the benefits of reviewing a book sometime after I finish reading it is I have more time to form opinions and thoughts about it. And during that time, I realized that it is a pretty unmemorable book for me. One that didn't stick with me for very long, 2 stars. In 5th place for me is The Color of Joy, a novella collected here in Nightmare Seasons written by Charles L. Grant. I did not find a great description of the plot on the jacket of this book, and it's really hard to summarize this story without getting too spoilery, but I will do my best. The Color of Joy takes place around Christmas time, where there is a woman who finds that she is being stalked by a dark figure who is killing off the men that are close to her. This is something of a psychological horror story that delves into some familiar territory. I didn't find The Color of Joy nearly as gripping or suspenseful as Night Swift Dragons, the autumn story in this collection that I read during autumn of this year, or last year, I should say now. But alas, this is a Charles L. Grant story. The writing is great. I really enjoyed reading it. It's got a great winter vibe to it. It's a great holiday read. 3.5 stars for me. All right, in 4th place, we have Silent Night, which is a super chiller part of the Fear Street series written by R.L. Stine. The plot revolves around Riva, a rich, cruel girl who gets enjoyment pranking her fellow classmates at Shadyside High. But as Christmas draws near, someone starts pulling pranks on Riva, and they are wicked, wicked pranks. To my memory, this book is something of an outlier in the Fear Street series because Stine likes to make his protagonists particularly sympathetic, outcast characters who you can really root for. And in Silent Night, you have a lot of fun rooting against Riva because she is such a terrible person. This is a very 90s story. Riva's father owns a department store, and a lot of the story takes place in and around the department store. It's fun, dumb at times, but very, very entertaining. Like many Fear Street books that I've read or reread, the ending fell a little flat for me. It could have been a lot more satisfying, but still, this was a good time. This was a fun, festive read. 3.5 stars. In 3rd place, we have The Wilds, written by Claude Twelez. In The Wilds, a group of young campers and their camp counselors head out on a long, strenuous hike only to find themselves lost in the woods just as a snowstorm is starting to roll in. I'm gonna start by talking about what I feel are the weaknesses of this story. The Wilds is something of a B-movie version of Lord of the Flies. I didn't find the children particularly well written in the story. Their logic is a little shaky and the dialogue is not the best. Also, it felt like there were some important moments of the story that got glossed over. However, this was a very engaging read for me. I found myself thinking about it when I wasn't reading it, and I was always excited to pick up this book and jump back into the story. This is a memorable story. There's some great scenes in here that have stuck in my head since finishing it, and I look back fondly on my time reading it. It doesn't deliver on all the insanity that I felt like the story was promising, but regardless, this was a shocking and fast-moving novel. 3.5 stars. All right, in 2nd place, we have Black Christmas, written by Thomas Altman. In Black Christmas, as the titular holiday approaches, in the small town of Murdoch, a deranged killer starts murdering young women. Again, besides the name, there is no relation between this novel and the 1970s Bob Clark slasher film Black Christmas. In the novel Black Christmas, Altman focuses the narrative on the town's troubled sheriff and on the potential suspects and victims to be. The novel feels partly like a police procedural, which I'm not a big fan of, but it also feels a lot like a slasher film. The overall tone of the story is pretty bleak, which added to the suspense because it really feels like anything can happen, anyone can be killed. I really enjoyed the dark tone of the story and all of these shocks and twists that Altman throws at the reader. 4 stars. All right, and finally, in 1st place, the book I enjoyed reading the most from my winter TBR was Maynard's House, written by Herman Rocher. Maynard's House follows Austin, a Vietnam vet who travels up to the Sticks of Maine to live in a spooky, isolated home that was willed to him by one of his fallen comrades. Maynard's House is something of a character study of Austin, and it features a haunted house, the spirit of a hanged witch, and tons of psychological horror. Charles L. Grant, without a doubt, is the master of quiet horror. He is the one who created this subgenre. But ever since finishing Maynard's House, whenever I hear the term quiet horror, this is the first story that comes to mind. The only real gripe I have with this book is that there are some pretty slow moments somewhere around the middle of the story. There's moments that I wasn't quite sure how they were going to fit into the larger plot of the story. But aside from that, I found this to be an excellent book. I think it's a horror classic. There are tons and tons of super creepy moments throughout the novel. The writing is fantastic, and the ending will stay with you long after you close the book. 4.5 stars. And there it is. That is a wrap on my winter TBR. I gotta say, I'm pretty excited to have spring off, some time to prep some new videos, try some new things out. I hope you are too. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would love to hear in the comments what you read this winter, if there's any other books that you're planning on reading, if you're planning on reading any of these books based on my review of them, let me know down below. And also while you're down there, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, share this video with a friend, and also please subscribe if you haven't. It really helps out the channel. Also, make sure to follow me on Instagram at @night_nerves. I hope 2025 is off to an amazing start for you, and I hope to see you in the next one. Stay spooky.